fortunate, after watching this DVD, to have 4 local professionals here to speak with us on the topic of spirituality, bereavement, and death. And I'd like to introduce them to you. First, Reverend Lise Sparrow. She studied for her Master of Arts in Divinity at Harvard Divinity School and has served as pastor of the Guilford Community Church since 2000. Until that time, she taught intercultural communication to graduate students at the School for International Training in Brattleboro for 25 years. She has a doctoral degree in culture, language, and diversity, and has a special interest in cross-cultural aspects of death and dying.
So one thing I want to say is I feel like I have a unique, it's probably not that unique, but anyway, one of the things I hold when I think about working with people who are dying is that in my work, my goal is to establish relationships so that when people are dying, we already have a relationship, so that I'm just not walking into the room cold. Now, of course, that isn't always the case, and so, of course, then the opposite, and this is why I call it paradox, is I feel like I always also need to be prepared to walk into a room where I don't know the person, and I don't know the family, and to still be of use. So I think that's one paradox I would say I hold, and I think the wonderful thing about hospice work as we do it, as hospice is created, is that you start before the person is just on the brink, because it could be 6 months before, and I think that makes such a huge difference. It can be a gradual developing so that those last days are just part of a longer relationship, and I think that's what we might always work towards. Another place that I think is a paradox for me is when I tilt from hope of surpassing death to acceptance of death, and how are we going to walk through this together. And I think it's one of those tensions that I hold, and that I'll talk about this more in a minute, but it's harder with people that you know well, but I do think all of us have seen people kind of come miraculously through experiences, so I always hold out the possibility that what we're looking at now might transform itself. And I feel it's my obligation to be a beacon for that possibility, whether or not I haven't come as a person of faith, but just because I've seen it happen. But then there also is this part of people that sometimes hold on to hope when I'm not so sure it's of use anymore, and that actually I wish I could be having a conversation about what might actually happen. And I think that's another skill that I think is a really tough one that I just want to put out. I also wanted to mention that Vermont is the most secular of all states, and so I felt a little bit like they weren't really talking to our context. I would even say in my church, I'm not sure if anybody really believes in God. So, so basically, I can't assume much, and so I think there's always that need for the conversation. I also, I just have a couple more things. I think I carry into a room a belief that at death happens most easily, and there needs to be a certain amount of peace. Optimally, that peace isn't morphine-induced peace, and sometimes I feel, I probably judge, or maybe I shouldn't judge, that I wish there were a peace that didn't happen because we had to up the pain meds. I wish that there was a peace that could happen because what's happening in the room is so peaceful that it can just happen. And so one of the things that I feel they talked about a bit, but I wanted to hold up because it's something that I am very aware of, is sometimes the peace that needs to happen is in the people in the room, and sometimes the peace that needs to happen is in the individual. And I feel like my role is often to listen so well that it might be to give voice to someone so that the person who's dying knows that then that person is going to be at peace. And sometimes it's to encourage other people in the room to be quiet so that this person could be peaceful. And so it's really, they talked a lot about the family, but I guess I wanted to put the peace factor in. I don't know how long, did I use my, okay. two more points I was going to say. One is, I wanted to talk a little bit about prayer. I think I'm a little more proactive than what they were encouraging about offering the possibility of prayer at the end of a conversation before I leave. And the reason I do that, and I just want to put it out, is because I think it gives me a good opportunity to be an active listener and to put into the room what I think has been said. So that if I know I only have 10 or 15 minutes and I'm leaving the room, I offer the person, I say, would you like me to pray for you? Or would you like to pray? And then I'll gather up what we've been talking about and kind of put it out. And I feel like that does a little bit of a weaving thing. And often the person will then say, I want to pray too, and they'll add what I've missed, which I think is great. And I just want to put it out as prayer is talking to God, but it's also a way of talking to each other and that. And finally, I didn't think they talked enough about touch. And I really think that people I know or I don't know, sometimes all I have to do is sit down and hold somebody's hand, whether they're conscious or not, and I think a lot can happen. There's a lot more I could say about that whole piece, but I really just want to put that out there, that I really think that touch, along with pets, just holding someone's hand or feet or whatever appendage is not covered, or their brow or something, is very powerful, and you don't need words. So those would be a few thoughts I'd toss into the group for all of us.
Thank you. Next, Rabbi Tom Payne, who came to Brattleboro from Cincinnati in July of 2010 to serve as rabbi for the Brattleboro area Jewish community, Congregation Shir Eharim. While in Ohio, he served as rabbi, music director, educator, and chaplain for numerous institutions. Rabbi Hain received musical training at the Peabody Institute at the Johns Hopkins University, earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin, and his master's degree in rabbinic coordination from Hebrew Union College. In addition to working in Brattleboro, Rabbi Hain is also an interfaith chaplain for Beacon Hospice in Massachusetts.
It is challenging to talk about a subject that for many people is so vague, and that many of you have so many diverse experiences in this field. I'm reminded of a story where there's a guy who survived the Johnstown flood, and he made his living traveling around speaking about what it was like and how he survived the John. And he died and went to heaven, and God offered him, so we all have to do something, before this audience of all the angels here in heaven. What can you do? He said, well, I can talk about the Johnstown flood. Okay, that's what we do. So he said, I should tell you that Noah is in the audience. So I feel a bit intimidated by so much experience. But I guess I'll share a few random thoughts that might be relevant in this case. I was a spiritual seeker at some time before I actually decided to study to become a rabbi. And someone in a class I was taking made this point that really caused me to bristle. I really rebelled against this idea. He said, you see the word spirituality, if you take the three letters off both ends of this word, what you have in the middle is ritual. Ritual is central to spirituality. And I thought, no, I don't like that idea, because I had rebelled against ritual in my youth, and felt that wasn't important, that wasn't central to spirituality. But over time, I've worked with that. I've continued to struggle with that idea, and I can see how important it is. There was an example. As a rabbi, I ended up working as a long-term care, a chaplain in a long-term care facility, and officiated at many funerals. And one of the rituals of a Jewish funeral is lowering the casket into the ground while the mourners are present. And that's a very cathartic and, for many people, painful experience to see their loved one go into the ground. And then to add to that, many of the mourners will take a shovel and, they'll shovel the earth, and you hear it go clunk on the casket, and it's just really painful and cathartic. And there are some people every now and then that will say, Rabbi, I just can't do that. That's something I just refuse to do. So there was a situation where a woman was burying her mother along with her sister, and her sister was very ill also. And she said, that's something I can't do. So of all the hundreds of funerals I'd done, and that was usually what was done at the end of the service, I was getting ready, saying the concluding prayers, and I gave the nod for the person to go ahead and lower the casket, and then I remembered, oh no, she didn't want me to have that done. And there it goes down on the ground, and she's weeping and sobbing, and I assume she's just fuming with me, like so angry. And after that's in the ground, she says to me, what do? You take it in your hands? And I was apologizing and saying, I'm so sorry. I overlooked. It was my fault. No, she said, the dirt. What do? You take it in your hands and you... Yeah, okay. So it turns out it was a cathartic experience for her. And that ritual was important to her as much as she resisted the idea of it. And sadly, a year or so later, when her sister died, she called me again to officiate at her funeral. So I know that there was something to it. It doesn't always work out that way. But people aren't always accustomed to ritual. And sometimes, like you say, they may not request a prayer, but when you offer it, they will willingly accept it as an opportunity. I found that to be the case recently with a gentleman I was visiting who was trying to reach his daughter, and he was on his cell phone, and he had the cell phone to his ear constantly, and it was even off. I mean, but he thought he was talking to somebody. He was somewhat delusional. And so I offered the opportunity to pray, that we would pray together, and I began reading from a book, and he would start repeating the lines as though I was prompting him to give expression to something that he wanted to say, and there he was, holding his phone and talking as though he was talking to God, and it was really quite moving to see that. But in many cases, like you said, it's just touch. You really don't know what people want or need, and you try to feel your way along just to feel what's right and what's appropriate. And I was in a situation a few weeks ago with a woman who, she was suffering from dementia, among other things, and she didn't, it seemed clear that she couldn't remember who I was or why I was there, and she just didn't know whether to trust me or what my intentions were. So I reached out and took her hand, and just holding her hand, it gave her the comfort of knowing, yeah, okay, this is somebody I can trust, and I don't know why he's here, I don't know who he is, but I feel a sense of connection, and that's what was most important. So, all we can do is to feel our way, sometimes stumble our way along, and hope that we've been helpful, knowing that our intentions are whole.
Kathy Leo founded the Hallowell Singers in 2003. Since then, she has continued to organize, coordinate, and guide the 40-member hospice choir in the Brattleboro area. Kathy draws on her 10-year experience as a midwife. Whether as a midwife to birth or a midwife to death, Kathy sees through a lens of acceptance and has an understanding of life's transitions as natural and powerful times of great opening.
Well, I guess I'm here with a different voice. I am probably representing the non-religious sect here, and although I consider myself very spiritual, I'd say my first response, though, after watching this conference is to say, I'm so grateful this dialogue is happening, that this conversation is happening, and that we're really looking at this spiritual piece at the end of life, because it's a beautiful place to go and to help a person make this journey. I also want to say that I've been at bedsides with many of the faces I see out here, and I think that this community, especially watching this film, this is what we do. It's what we do. As Lisa said, we go into each room with kind of this don't-know mind, and we adapt and we adjust and we respond to whatever it is before us. So I'm the coordinator of Hallowell, and for those of you who don't know what we do, we're a 40-member choir that half of us come from this church in Guilford that we may or may not believe completely forgot. And, we have a wonderful bridge and connection, so Lisa and I are often at bedsides together, holding the space really beautifully. The music serves as a really wonderful tool, as a way, as an entry into that very sacred space that Carolyn talked about. I want to be her, by the way. She was really wonderful. She was my favorite in the film because she spoke so authentically and from the heart. But what I love about having this tool of music is that we get to do all of those things they spoke about in the film through song. And it's a really powerful way to be around a bedside. So many things happen. You know, people hear about bedside singing and they think, oh, yeah, anybody can sing. And I'm grateful for the music part in here, but they really just touched on what actually happens when the human voice is in harmony, raw, vulnerable, around a bedside. What happens for the families, what happens for the person in the bed, what happens for the singers. And I feel like there's so many ways that the singing affects all of those places, including the culture, just starting to shift the lens about what's possible at the end of life and how we can all be involved in this journey to make it a more comfortable journey, just a more spiritual journey, whatever that means. In terms of the spiritual religious piece, one of the reasons this tool is so powerful is that if we're singing to someone who is very religious, we get to speak to that through what songs we choose. And if they have no community, no church, no religion, we get to be that. We get to create that. We have songs in other languages that are chants. We have all kinds of hymns. We have secular songs. We have songs about nature and spirit. We have a huge repertoire, and all of the songs have a different feeling and a different energy, and it's a really wonderful tool. We are so blessed. We have been doing this for 8 years, and I have to say this community has been so supportive in welcoming us in and using this, which is available to everyone. So we've seen all kinds of deaths, we've seen reconciliations, we've seen healing, we've seen struggle, and we get to sing to all of that. And then we get to process. And with Hallowell, I think after doing this for 8 years, I consider it my spiritual work in the world. And we consider it a practice at this point, where we really quiet ourselves before we go into that space. We've learned how to do that. And then how they keep talking about being present, well, that's what we get to do. We get to go stand there around this place where somebody's taking this journey that we're all going to make, and we just sing to it. And while we're singing, every song we're singing, we're reading the room, we're assessing, as they talk about assessment. How do you do assessment? Well, we take a pulse, we watch, we look around, we see how people are responding. Are they crying? Are they opening? Are they moving closer? Do we move them closer? So we have a really, really extraordinary opportunity to help change the energy of somebody's process at the end of life. And I'm so grateful to Brattleboro Hospice for being open to this, for helping to support it, and Ryan calls us, and we have a great thing here, and we've modeled this for many other communities. There are fires starting all over the country. So know that we're a great tool. It's a wonderful tool. We're very blessed. So ask any musical questions.
Finally, Helen Daly is a clinical psychologist practicing brain-based psychotherapy and spiritual psychology in southern Vermont. She teaches and leads retreats and workshops for the general public and religious and mental health professionals.
If anyone feels, I'm not sure why I'm here, I'm the psychologist. And I hear all these spiritual folks and all you folks who are out there doing amazing work. We've all said that. I thought it was a terrific video. I really enjoyed watching it. my path into this, my husband John Daly, whom a lot of you know, he and I led support groups for cancer patients in our early marriage, and about half of the people died in the groups, and they totally changed my life, totally. And I saw what amazing spirit and healing is possible at the end of life. And I've sort of walked both sides of the street as a psychologist. I work at the retreat, and I've been very involved in a Christian community of faith. I kind of agree with some of the folks here. I felt that we could be more active, and my sense of how we are as a community in Brattleboro area, we're more active. I felt the panelists were wonderful, and they were very appropriate and very professional and very psychologically mature and saying all the right things. And it was a little too clinical for me. I pray with my patients at the retreat if they ask me to. I also think there's so much confusion around spirituality and religion in our world and our society today that my clients ask me, who is God? What is prayer? So I share my understanding of that, and with a discussion about this is mine, this is how I think about it, what do you think about it, as a way to get the ball rolling and help them get started. I just had a conversation with a client yesterday about that. And she finds that very helpful. So again, I think with psychological maturity, where we're respectful of the other person's dignity and self, that we're not trying to impose our own beliefs on someone else or our agenda on them, I think we could be a little more out there with our own spirit. I was the African American woman, Carol. Yeah, she had some really good juice going on. I liked her. She wasn't afraid to talk about spirit. I also, of course, loved what I actually am for psychoanalytic grace. I think that's really important, and I guess I'm a little more active around that. I have folks come to me in my clinical practice. I have a woman I'm thinking of who came directly from this oncologist's office receiving a cancer diagnosis, who came direct. I said, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "I have to heal my life. I have to heal my life before I die." So a word that I wrote down was redemption, which is a bit of a loaded word, but what does it mean to redeem our life? And to make whole our life, to heal our life. So I'm a little more proactive like that than the Doka gentleman talked about. So he seemed to sort of be holding back more. And the last thing I would say is I think you all do a great job, and the folks on the film do a great job of working with people who aren't more severely distressed and troubled. I tend to see folks who are quite acutely depressed, anxious. I work a lot with people with trauma, and I was glad that the woman brought up trauma. I have clients who feel their whole life has not only been without meaning, but has been a horrendous error, and that they are a horrendous error. Their very being has been a mistake. So helping people with that level of distress as they're approaching death, those are the kinds of levels where I see someone with my more professional skills can be helpful.
Anyone who has a question for any of our panelists, a particular one or any of them?
It's not a question, it's an observation.
Okay.
In the film, people were acting kind of mystified about the function of music and how it was so transformative. And as I understand it from a belief in different energy centers in the body, the throat, which is, I guess it's the third chakra down, is where the head and the body can integrate, so that to sing is to bring these two, which are in our culture often very much separated, back together into wholeness. Makes a lot of sense to me.
When we,
Speak loud so everyone can hear.
yeah, very well. When we reached that point in the discussion of the DVD where they were talking about veterans and how important it is for them sometimes to actually remember and reminisce all of those experiences, it occurred to me that we were only looking at this from our cultural point of view, when in fact so many parts of the world right now are at war or have been in war for so long that in fact something for them is very different than what we know here in our culture in the U.S. I realize that's not necessarily relevant, but you know, as we talk about diversity, and some folks might be, you know, from other areas or go to other areas where that could make a very big difference, how they would view that in their life's outlook would just be radically different. It really just comes to mind because my husband got an actual round of applause when we were on vacation, and they had a small film right before the show started at SeaWorld talking about thanking veterans. And they asked veterans to stand up, and it's the first time he's ever been asked. But he's 64, and he's a Vietnam vet. And he was absolutely flabbergasted and really delighted. And that was a life-changing moment for him. So I have to say that it would matter to talk about those events like veterans have gone through.
Yes.
I just want to add a comment that reminded me of something in terms of cultural issues. There was something that happened locally that involved the medical staff and others in making serious errors due to cultural misunderstandings from a family that was from the Far East, from Laos, as a matter of fact. And what resolved the issues was a cultural interpreter, someone who came from SIT to explain what was happening, what the dynamics, the family dynamics were in the situation in the context of their culture and not ours. And it changed everything in the scenario. So sometimes that's necessary, that kind of interpretation.
And do you know who was responsible for making the connections with that person?
Yes, but I'd rather not say.
I was just wondering what their role was, not their name.
Oh, they weren't connected to the
medical
to the situation.
community.
No.
That book, Catch the Spirit and Fall Down, is
Yes.
a wonderful example of what you're talking about. And the hospital that was involved with the people in that book has since let shaman come into the hospital. They had a few qualifications, but there has been a wonderful result because this book was written and people stayed involved. So it's a big issue.
Can that be repeated so we, just a small piece of it?
Yes, say the title of the book again, or if you want to repeat it, turn your chair around, Jen.
I think I have the title right. Catch the Spirit.
When the spirit catches you.
Oh, okay, and you fall down.
It's by Ann Fadiman,
Fadiman.
F-A-D-I-M-A-N, Ann Fadiman.
She's a wonderful writer. But the real beauty of that book is that the hospital that was involved in this misunderstanding has since then come to grips with the situation, admitted their misunderstanding and their errors, and has allowed the shamans or the religious people of the, what was the community? Right. has allowed their religious people into the hospital to do their work instead of just, excluding them. So it's been, that was reported in the Times, and I was like, yes, finally. Those are the inroads that are so huge. Even the little crack in the sidewalk that allows some of that into people's lives is really transformative.
Yes.
Could I just make a comment?
Yes, Andy, or all of you.
I just want to flip this a bit. We're looking at spirituality supporting dying. I'm looking at dying supporting spirituality. I want to raise that question, that issue for us, that some traditions, and the Buddhist in particular, had dying as a spiritual practice. And we are in such denial in this culture about dying, let alone seeing it as a means of spiritual practice or transformation. So I think I was also thinking about the 12-step models of surrender. And surrender is spiritual practice, surrender to illness, surrender to aging and dying as being an opportunity for spiritual practice.
Thank you. Any other comments? Questions? I brought something to read that came across my computer just this morning, I guess in a timely way. This is from something that comes as an email subscription to me, Internet Weekly, INNER. And these are weekly excerpts from various spiritual writings that the editor of this chooses to share each week. And today's it's called charityfocus.org, if anyone is interested in reading some of these. And it's entitled A 9-Year-Old's Hidden Self by Jacob Needleman. And this is an excerpt, so it sort of begins in the middle of his piece, but after the first few sentences, you'll get the gist. The quality and strength of Love Song's inner being was also brought home to me through an event that took place in my home. Love Song is a Tibetan name, and there's a photograph of a Tibetan monk. After one of his weekends working with our translation group, he stayed for a few days as a guest in my house in San Francisco. And I guess also I have the desire to send this to the moderator of this panel because of his confused nature about what it means to be fully present. One morning at the breakfast table, we were discussing this and that. I don't remember what. My 9-year-old daughter, Eve, was present. Ordinarily, she tended to be shy, especially when strangers or guests were present. But at one point in the conversation, during a brief pause, she looked up at Love Song, and without any preamble, she asked him, "What happens when people die?" I was startled, and a certain warmth rose up in me. It was obvious she had been keeping this question for a long time inside herself without letting anyone know. My own attempts to make room in our relationship for this kind of question had not gone anywhere, or so it seemed to me. But now, suddenly, I felt her hidden self and felt the strength of its need. How would Love Song respond? I set myself to listen to him with as much eagerness as my daughter. Love Song turned toward her with his warm brown face and his lucent black eyes and began talking to her as though she were, like him, simply a normal human being for whom such questioning was as natural and as important as eating, a human being who was, like him and all of us, someday going to die. I don't remember the content of what he said to her. I do remember thinking that what he said was not extraordinary, things that any serious adult might say to a serious, inquiring child. But what I do remember, as vividly as though it were yesterday, was the resonance of his voice, the stillness of his body, and the warm attention of his face. I remember sensing the vibration of a certain kind of energy passing between love song and my daughter that served more as an answer to her question than any words themselves could have. I saw her eyes deepen as though they were seeing something strong and new, not outside herself, but inside herself. Perhaps she did not realize what was happening inside herself. Maybe she still doesn't know, but I saw it. A quality of attention was passing between love song and my daughter that is becoming more and more rare in our common world. And it is this something that desperately needs to pass between people. It is the mutual flow of this special quality of attention between human beings that all people, whether they know it or not, are starved for. Not all the praise, touching, words, teaching, smiling, sympathizing, serving good causes, not any or all of it can do what this quality of shared attention can do. Its lack is more of a threat to our world than anything else, or rather its increasing absence in human relationships is at the root of all else that now threatens to destroy or degrade us beyond recovery. The interscene hatred and egoism and immorality that is crowding out not only our ancient traditional ways of life and the life of nature itself, but which is also crowding out the human memory of what mankind is and is made for. One last quote, and I wish I could attribute it to the correct person, and I can't at the moment. The quote that, "I am not a human being having a spiritual experience. I am a spiritual being having a human experience."
Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, I believe.
Pronounce that?
Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, if I'm saying that right.
Thank
I
you.
believe it's where that.
Thank you. So thank you, all of you, for coming, and please call on us at any time.